Tarak has been in games for 12 years. Today, we're going to talk about growing teams. What teams have you grown already?
Grown teams in Bangalore during the COVID period, where we had to start an entire new studio. I believe we went from 0 to something like 40 or 50 people.
Why grow an international remote team?
There's a huge untapped gaming talent there. You go there, you realize there's hundreds of millions of young people. They all play games.
A big one that comes to mind straight away when you think we would do that differently.
Really, it is just culture. How do you build trust with people that haven't worked with before? But not only have you not worked with them before, they maybe have not worked with anybody like you before.
Tarak Ford, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. I like to start the podcast with how we met. I guess in this situation is how we met in person. We was at Brighton Develop not too long ago. How did you find Brighton?
It was really good. It's always good to get out there and kind of realize that there's more going on just outside of your studio and, meet new people like yourself and old friends you've not seen for a while. So yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, no, it was a good time. And I want to actually touch on something you said, which I thought was quite funny. So Tarak has been in games for 12 years, now heads development at Kwalee, which is a very large kind of mobile gaming publisher. They also self-publish hundreds of employees. I don't know if you can correct me with how big, but yeah, very big studio. And you're the head of development. So I want to start with, what is a typical day as head of development at Kwalee? Because I feel like every title has its own version of what that actually means. So like, what does it actually mean in Qualee's case?
Exactly, yeah. And I don't want to give the stereotypical answer that every day is different. So I'll try and spare you of that whilst also actually just saying that. But yeah, essentially I'm running 4 dev teams, 3 in the UK, 1 in our Indian office. We have remote staff as well. And we're trying to make mobile games. We're trying to make prototype games. So we've got games in live ops. We've got games in very, very early development. And we've got games kind of in mid to soft launch. So making sure that the teams are organized, everyone's getting the support that they need, etc. Checking in with my producers. I am formally a producer, head of production, so I'm kind of making sure that things are okay on that line, but also dipping my toes in, whether it's design, art, programming, whatever kind of needs my help. So yeah, that's, I guess, the day-to-day is really making sure that things are flowing and there's no immediate blockers that can't be solved.
Fantastic. So today we're going to talk about growing teams, because you've done that a fair bit. And also, interestingly, done it remotely, even with countries like in Asia, from my understanding. So very interesting perspective. So that's what we're going to dive into today. And we've got a lot of different questions around that. So I will start with just, if you could paint us a picture, like what teams have you grown already? Like what are the scales are we talking about here?
Sure. So yeah, so when I joined Kwalee, we were 20 people, and that included, the finance guy and everybody kind of involved, not just a game team. So we were 1 team, 2 developers, 2 artists, some QA, a producer, etc. And as we had success, predominantly it was in hyper casual, so we started to expand. Let's go from 1 team to 2 teams, and how do we manage that? Do we need an extra pair of hands in production, etc. We went from, I'd say, smallest we were ever, 10 people. So everyone knows each other's names. Everybody knows what people are working on, the day before, all in the same office in Leamington Spa. All the way up to now, we're around 50 people across all of our different game teams. And we also work with the publishing team, which is its own separate entity, and also external developers, etc. So we've grown teams internally in Leamington Spa. We've grown teams in Bangalore during the COVID period, where we had to start an entire new studio. I believe we went from 0 to something like 40 or 50 people before any of us had touched foot in that studio. So that was a really interesting time. And yeah, that's kind of where we've gone from and where we are now.
So the team as it is now is 50 people.
Yeah,
the one that you're in. And then publishing is separate. Okay, that makes sense. Alrighty. So you mentioned Bangalore there. So why grow an international remote team? Because we've seen a lot of talk about how we are bringing people back into the office, but that's kind of like as far away on the slider as it goes. So like, why build an international remote team?
It is. Well, I mean, so it's remote from us, but there is a studio there. There's a fantastic studio there. We were looking to expand our presence, so we were outside of the UK. We want to be a global publisher. So say, okay, well, how can we be a global developer? Are there places in the world that are kind of ripe for expansion? Games are coming up. There's obviously China. There's the US, but that's kind of a saturated market. And there's countries like Japan that are maybe slightly harder to get a grasp in. So we came across India. We looked. There were some other studios starting there as well. There were studios that have been existing there for a long time. I believe Sumo Digital, Codemasters have operations there. And then it really came just to looking at the cities, where do we go? And we found that Bangalore is the tech hub. There's Intel, there's Microsoft, there's everybody there that you could possibly think of. And obviously there's a huge untapped gaming talent there. You go there, you realize there's hundreds of millions of young people, they all play games, but there's very little history of game making there, but there's lots of people who want to do it. So we decided, listen, if we're going to do it anywhere, that seems like the exciting place to be. And then, we started, okay, well, let's start with a small office. What do we want? We want a game team. So we're going to need some programmers, we're going to need some artists, we're going to need a producer. Let's put some feelers out. Let's see what we get in terms of CVs. Let's see how much we're going to have to, grow from. Maybe we plant people from the UK over there and we kind of grow it that way. Or maybe there's actually some talent we can take from the local areas, other studios. And it was really an organic process. I wasn't involved in the kind of big picture. This is the plan of how we're going to go from X to, to Y in terms of expansion. But yeah, I mean, I think it's gone well, but there's obviously a ton of things. If we were to do it again, it would go so much better in terms of organization and onboarding and all of that sort of stuff.
Perfect follow-up to what I'm about to say. I was going to say, what's the unforeseen challenges you've encountered when scaling your team internationally? So I guess because there's so many, what would you say is like the big one that comes to mind straight away when you think we would do that differently?
Okay, well, I wouldn't do it during a global pandemic. That's the number one. Is unbelievably difficult to build relationships with people and build trust and get across your company culture with people that you've never met in a studio, that you've never touched, and it's extremely difficult. And it kind of relates, but really it is just culture. How do you get across culture and how do you build trust with people that you haven't worked with before? But not only have you not worked with them before, they maybe have not worked with anybody like you before. And when I say like you, I mean a kind of Western developer mindset. The big, not necessarily issue, but the big thing about India development, as I see it, is that a lot of outsource work happens there, or a lot of support work happens there. And the main difference between a main studio and a support studio is that ability to make decisions and kind of have conviction behind what you want to do and your passion. A lot of it is, we've been told to do this. This is the deadline. We need to deliver on this. And that, I feel, is quite culturally pervasive in India. I obviously don't want to draw too blanket stereotype. There's really ingenious people out there who are willing to push the boat and say, this is what I think we should do. But in general, there's a lot of people who are used to, hearing, this is what we have to do. We need to do this now. And that's not how we work. That's not what we wanted to do from the beginning. It was not about producing art for our games in India. It was about producing games full circle, even down to marketing, etc. And maybe we didn't do enough from the outset to really implant that, hey, we are growing our team with you and we want you to feel complete equals with us. And when we say something, it's not a command. It's an open invite for a discussion about how we should get to, the result that we want to get to. And I do feel like we were semi-aware of that. We want to make a good impression. We try to make, be as friendly as possible. But I'm sure now, looking back, there's plenty of things we could do. We could have taken external advice from people. We could have spoken to other studios that have opened places there, and hopefully they would have shared their knowledge. But yeah, all in all, that is the big takeaway: the cultural merging of two different areas of the world.
No, this came up actually on a previous podcast with Kshiraj, who's from India, and he's worked then in King Spanish version, King Stockholm version, and then he's also worked at Rovio, which was Finnish. And he's had like that slider of culture, and he echoed a lot of what you said. And he found actually going back to kind of Indian style development, that was a challenge. I'm just thinking from the listener's point of view, it's like, if you are going to work with people from that world, how would you try to communicate that point that you made, where we want it to be more, I guess, people having the initiative, a bit more equal and less like take task, do task? How would you go about doing that?
I think you need to, well, first of all, you need to fly there. You need to spend some time there. Ideally as much time as possible, not a fleeting visit where it's like handshakes and then back on the plane. So if you can get yourself out there, break down the kind of any sort of illusion that you have this secret sauce to making games. Like this when I was younger, I grew up, I didn't know that games were made in the UK. For me, everything was made in America, right? So when I found out that the games that I played were actually made in the town, like one town across from me, it was like amazing. And when I first got my foot there as QA, it's like everyone's, that thing as a child, everyone's an adult and everyone knows what they're doing and they must always be right because they made X game that I kind of liked. That's not the reality of the situation. So if there is any of that between you and your new studio, especially if it's from a culture that is used to being kind of spoken to and directed, you need to break that down. And you can do that kind of in all manner of ways. You can open up to your struggles that you've had previously and why that you hope the people starting can help you make that better. But equally, you can just be more involved in those initial early projects, so you don't leave people kind of at a whim of like a Slack message in the morning, a kind of follow up, the day after. You have to sort of show them you're working and that you don't know the answer and that you're working through things and you're failing, and sharing that with the team, and sometimes drawing suggestions out of them and just go in with that suggestion, like, what, we're going to do that and we're going to learn from it. Don't assume it will happen just because you're kind of nice to people, or like I said, you've met them, you went out for one beer with them and then you flew back. Like, you really have to go out your way to say, hey, we're in this together and we're going to learn together and we're going to fail and succeed together.
Yeah, and I think that expands to more like just a global thing, right? Like when you're in a remote situation. So what are the 3 things as the person onboarding a candidate that I need to nail every time?
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, you need to introduce them to the decision makers in the studio. Like, even if they're a junior artist coming onto a team where they are very unlikely to interact with your executive producer, etc., it's still very important that they touch base with them and they know that person is a human being, that when they see them around, they feel valued. They're not a small cog. When you're a small cog in a wheel, it's very easy to go, well, I'm just going to go be a slightly larger cog somewhere else. You don't feel appreciated. Build up a vast wealth of documentation about your team, because as much as you may grab them for an hour in the morning, they come in and say, right, Harry, sit down. We're going to, I'm going to talk to you about what we're trying to achieve here. I want to give you a bunch of reading material to go away with as well. And when I say reading material, I don't mean walls and walls of Confluence pages. I mean like something fun that you crafted for them, like introductions to the team and what you hope that they can achieve and who they can go to with certain problems. A third thing of what you should probably do, so I hear a lot of people, and this has happened even here in the past, I'm sure, maybe they're on a probation and it's 6 months at the company, and that kind of comes and goes and it's never actually addressed. And it's like, oh, I guess I passed then. I haven't actually heard that. Take that seriously with them. And I think, of course, if they pass probation and you never mention it because they've been so good, that's fine. It's not necessarily detrimental. But if people feel like they have achieved something and you make a big deal out of it and you talk about it as we come up to it. So, we're 3 months in, how do you feel that you're working towards your initial goals that we set you in order to, quote, pass probation? When they do achieve that, you can get them in. You can say, you've absolutely smashed this and I really appreciate you being here and I want to hear feedback from you as well. Take feedback from them so the next person's onboarding is slightly better. That's always huge. When I joined Kwalee, my manager at the time was the COO, the current COO, Jason, because again, we were much smaller. And it was going all right. I was doing a good job. And he pulled me in like 4 months maybe into the probation period because I had requested a work phone. It's like the dream of like a young guy. I was like, a phone paid for by the company. And you couldn't technically have it until you passed probation. And he said, you know what? I'm going to pass your probation early. You can have the phone, whatever. Just get out of it, you little scamper. Just kind of, but like it felt great and it boosted my confidence. Like, damn, like, I'm doing a good job. And that, it's hard to measure, but I'm sure it meant that I put in more effort and I put in more enthusiasm towards what I was doing in those following 2 months. Than if it had just kind of passed over because he didn't quite have time to get round to me, because it's seen as like a non-issue. You've passed, big deal. So I guess they're my top 3 things off the top of my head.
Oh, no, very good. And yeah, I relate to the recognizing achievement. Like when I had the equivalent as a recruiter, we also have probations and you have the goals and what you're expected. So when you pass, it's a day, people mention it and it feels good, man.
It's important, right?
Yeah, it's very important. Like in recruitment, that's like kind of taken to sometimes the extreme. Like there's screens and every time you get a deal, as they say, we celebrate. Like everyone feels when it happens, even if it's a small thing. And I think that can be translated to more industries really. Like we need to celebrate those wins rather than just only focus on when a bad thing happens. That's the only time you hear from your boss, right? It should be an 80-20 where positive. Oh, by the way, maybe do this better. Positive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so going on to what you should do, like you're a candidate, you're going in. You've obviously done this at a few places and you've had a positive experience. What have you always gone in with the mindset of this is what I'm going to prove in those first 3 months or 6 months, whatever it may be?
Interesting. So from a candidate perspective, my context is I prepped Unity developers. Some actually joined Kwalee even. And my job was to make sure they not only got the job, but they stayed because they were all contractors. So I actually had first week check-in, then month check-in. So from an onboarding perspective, it's like, okay, you need to find out the man. If it's the boss, then make him your friend, please.
Yeah.
And by making him your friend, that doesn't mean kissing up. It literally just means, okay, what would make his life easier? If he's given you a lot of instructions, maybe do things more proactively. It's like, I noticed we started doing that. I can now take that off your plate. Like all these things, I very selfishly for me and the candidate, but also the client, make yourself irreplaceable. Okay, how do you make yourself irreplaceable? Give so much value where it's like, it would be silly to let Joe go. He's like, yeah, because Joe's doing all of this. So as a candidate, if I'm going in, I'd be looking for things that I could do outside of my job description. Or if there's something in my job description which I could do a lot quicker, I would make that very clear. Like, look, I can do this in X amount of time. It's actually happened where they projected a code rewrite would take 6 weeks and it was done in 2 weeks. So like, definitely don't stretch that out to 6 weeks.
No.
You do it in 2 weeks and then you say, here are the other things I could do with the remaining time. Amazing. Like what an amazing experience from the client perspective. So to recap there, it's like actually try to build that relationship with the manager and understand what his life would look like if it was a bit better, and then see if you can enhance that. And then, yeah, be friendly. I think there's a big thing in a remote world. Some people go too much to cog in the machine mentality, where it might not be efficient to send that extra message to that colleague where you don't need to talk to them, but you want to build those relationships for when you do need them. So you're not seen as that, in my case, like that annoying contractor who's asking for help. Like you want to be the person who's come in and helped. So yeah, building that relationship and just becoming irreplaceable, like as much as possible.
Yeah. No, I agree. I really like the point of making somebody's life easier. Like that's advice I give to people when they're going to go for an interview. Like they may be looking at or they may be asking questions rather to ascertain your technical skill level or whatever. But really the feeling that they want at the end of the day is that you won't let them down. You know, you're coming into their studio, you're going to be a net positive, not a net negative. So everything you say has to build that case. Nothing should be neutral, like wasted time. And obviously it shouldn't be negative. And that's, yeah, if you think about that rather than stressing over, what if they ask me that one question about shaders that I can't answer? Think about any question. Imagine there is a question you can't answer. Don't worry about the specifics. And then think, how do I show them about how do I approach questions I can't answer? How would I deal with something that I can't solve straight away? And that is always like the tilting factor. I trust that person to come into this team, whereas the other person, they may have said all the right things, but maybe it was a bit too scripted, or I feel like they were saying what I wanted to hear, because everybody's so self-aware nowadays, right? Everyone knows what to say. So yeah, super important. And I think going back to like the cog in the machine thing, it's so easy now. You see the memes on LinkedIn and stuff, which I've spent a lot more time on recently, is that don't fall for the perception that every single company doesn't care about you and it's always you versus the company, and just it's you and nothing else, and just move from company to company, just getting that slight bump and all of this. Like, of course, maybe in some industries there's a place for that, huge industries where that's your main goal. You're only in it for that anyway, so you may as well do it. But if you're coming into a team, we talk about building teams. You can't build a team where the team doesn't have long-term buy-in, right? So you need to bring that to the team as well. You need to go in with the mindset of like, I don't mind going out of my way in this situation. I finished my work in 6 hours. So rather than go home early, I'm going to help somebody else. I'm going to unburden them for further 2 hours. Not because it's going to benefit me today, but it's going to compound over time in my reputation in the team that I care about, because I'm here for the long haul. And when people see that in their teammates, it makes them work harder. And it's this like reverberation of actual good vibes and good positive effort put from the team. And you can instill that people from day one. Everybody pays attention to the person who's just come into the team. And if you come in and you raise the level, everybody else has to sit up straight and be like, right, okay, this is the new level. And it's a huge impact you can make. And if you've got a good manager, they will definitely notice that.
Just couldn't agree more. Like whenever I was working, like when I was at the recruitment company I was working at, my goal was to make Evolution, the company, as much value as possible. And then if I'm doing a good job, then happy days. But everything was angled to make Evolution as much money as possible. And then what ended up happening is I actually had like 6 months where I didn't do a placement for myself, but I pulled opportunities for the rest of the team. And I thought, I don't mind. I'm just trying to make Evolution money. The good things will come. But then my manager had to say, like, start being more selfish, please. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. And then I started. But then everything came good to me. And it was a lot of what goes around comes around. So like a lot of those relationships that I was building ended up benefiting me in a ways that I couldn't imagine. So when we take this to the gaming professional world, if you just add so much value, just so much value, like it's just good things will happen. Good things will happen. And in games specifically, like QA to producer to head of development, that was your journey. I noticed a lot of guests on the show, they happens to be the person who just always put their hand up and did extra work. And then magically, they got a very quick promotion. I wonder why that happened. Probably not on a job description. It said do X and then get promotion. But if you just do more stuff, the boss will be like, I want him to do more higher leverage stuff because he's very good, clearly. Let's make that happen. But that usually won't happen. They won't ask you, typically.
Exactly. Yeah, you need to take that initiative, and you need to, if you take that initiative and you're kind of stretching yourself to do things that you haven't been trained to do, or you haven't been dragged through years of gaining exactly the amount of experience that you need at some studios. That's how it works, right? You need to prove to us 10 times over you can do this thing before you have the opportunity to do it. If you're going to push yourself to go out of that way, you need to accept, well, what happens when I fail or I fall short? And you have to own up to your mistake, and you have to have that relationship again with your team where you're comfortable in saying, hey, I've messed this up and this is why it won't happen again, and this is why I've learned from it, and let's move forward. And even that accountability when things aren't going well builds in your favor. Like, again, it's not a negative, it's actually a positive. And when things are going super well, yeah, you learn some things, but I think there's some sort of saying, like, you learn more in defeat than you do when you win
or you
learn.
I love that saying. You win or you learn.
Yeah. So you need to be able to put yourself out there. And then again, if people see you fail and you're in charge of the team, then they're going to be more open to failing, as long as the goal was, achieve something brilliant or achieve something that would have changed the metrics in the game. And all this stuff adds up. There is no actual formula to making a good game. It's all of the things that you do whilst you pursue a logical and consistent target. If we do this, we will probably create something good. But all of the other stuff that encourages the team on a day-to-day basis is that stuff that you can't measure, but definitely results in really good game teams seem to make good games consistently, and poor game teams don't. It's not a kind of boring Excel formula that they have and you don't. It's all of that other stuff.
Yeah, and if there was that formula, then we would be getting loads of games and
we'd
some
have sussed it by now. Yeah.
Down. Yeah,
there's enough billions on the line. If it was a formula, we'd have sussed it.
100%. Yeah, I think the good teams. I just remembered that point you made about interviews and how to reply to a question where you don't know the answer. I've been on hundreds of interviews and I actually sit on them. So I've had a weird perspective where I can see a lot of different hiring strategies, and I get feedback from the candidate and the hiring manager. And some of the hiring managers ask questions which they know the candidate will have no way of knowing, to test how they would respond to that type of question. So people should prepare. And what I used to tell candidates is, this is an amazing layup, because you're going to say, I don't know. First of all, I always say is like, ask for clarification. Don't just say no. Sorry. You say, ask for clarification. Do you mean this? Is it similar to X? And if they say no, double time no, then you say, okay, actually haven't heard of that before. I think it's like this, but if not, I have no problem learning, because I've learned this thing where I had to do in 2 weeks, and I'm sure I can do that again here. And then You've actually just made the negative to a positive, because you've just had an opportunity to show that you learn quickly, which solves pretty much 90% of job descriptions. Like, if you just learn quickly, that's what I tried to have the takeaway as every interview. You learn quick and you're nice. Exactly.
What's your ceiling? That's the thing. Like, what is a team's ceiling? What is an individual's ceiling? Because you, like, say you're hiring for a programmer. The reason people do what you just said is, like, you ask questions that they can't answer, is because if you only ask the questions they had to answer, then you would never be able to tell the person who could go all the way to lead and the person who was actually going to cap off at, regular or senior or whatever. So you need to show that you've got that capacity to learn, and that is humility, it's curiosity, it's all those things kind of rolled into one.
Mm-hmm. I have a big pivot now, which is a difficult question, I feel.
Yep.
So you have an international team. My question is, do you believe you get innovation through diversity of thought?
Diversity of thought, yes, absolutely. I mean, kind of by definition, that question answers itself. Do I believe diversity in certain areas, cultural, ethnicity, whatever, is always the breeding ground for diverse opinions and innovation? Maybe. In some cases, yeah, it depends what you're building. This is the real thing. It depends what you're building. Like, I believe that there's a lot to be said for people being able to work together cohesively without too much misunderstanding. So, if we take it to the really kind of basic thing of, if you put a bunch of people with shared experiences together and then they try to create something in a small amount of time under strict resources, the fact that they have a lot of commonalities will probably actually help them deliver what they're trying to deliver in that sense. It's not always a benefit to say we need to make sure everybody in this team is as different to each other as possible. If you're trying to push the boundaries, though, maybe you're trying to do something artistically or speak into a certain point of view, and of course it's going to help to have varying opinions, worldviews, etc. And this is the thing, right? The more you travel for your personal life, or the more you work with people who are abroad, you realize, man, not everybody thinks like me, and that's really interesting. And I don't see a world in which it's normally a negative. I think if it's overly forced and crowbarred in for the sake of it, then absolutely it's going to be a detriment. And we have to be careful of that. We have to be very aware of that, because there are people who are out there to do that, whether it's in good faith or not. That's their MO. They believe it's always better. And there's very few things in life that are always better. So I think no is the short answer. Like it won't always lead to that. But in terms of how we've working with India, I think it's definitely helped us. It's helped us get better at communication. It's helped us understand that you have to, like we're talking about, you have to empower people to actually speak their mind. Or that may be more generally true to somebody in India working in a games company, but you will have people in your UK studio who have that same problem, right? They find it hard to say no if they've been given an order by somebody who happens to have a job title higher than them. And that's not what you want, because at some point, everybody with a superior job title had a lower job title. At least you'd hope so. Otherwise, they're not going to have much empathy for the team. So, hopefully that kind of answers your question without getting me into too much trouble.
No, I appreciate it. I think I've heard the term like diversity of thought will get innovation, and I really agree with that. And diversity of thought can happen through ethnicity, but can also happen, like you mentioned, there's people different within their own country. So yeah, when shoehorned in,
nothing's ever that easy. That's the thing. If you can say it in one sentence takeaway, then it's probably not true, or it's not a cohesive thought that can actually be actioned on.
So my follow-up question here is, when you're growing a team and you want to take this into account, I find this when someone's talking about how they want to build a team that gels well together, that seems like one of the biggest problems I've ever heard of, because we're dealing with humans, and the human puzzle piece doesn't sound easy. So how do you take that into account when you're actually growing a team, especially when you're growing at scale?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question, because I think the question comes is, how much should you take it into account? If you're going from 0 to 100 people and you need 100 people to execute what you're trying to do, I think then it's more important to think everybody that we hire needs to fit this vision that we have, and we're starting from scratch, and we can kind of design that group of people. We can have our extroverts and our introverts and our harder to control people who may be very creative and are more structured. You can do all that. If you're organically growing a team over time, it's very easy to fall for the trap of, you hear it all the time, right? Will they fit our culture? Or, do they fit our way of working? And that can be a problem, because then you end up in this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of everyone thinks like you, everyone acts like you. So I think rather than trying to pick people who have a specific set of traits that you have just to not rock the boat, you need to identify really what you don't want to bring into the team, the negatives. I was speaking to somebody recently from a different studio, and he said they have a policy which is, we don't hire creative arseholes. Everyone's heard this person, they're brilliant, but they're hard to work with. It's and they made the choice for their team that we're not willing to put up with that. Doesn't mean it won't work, but that's not what we're doing. And then I think it's always better to exclude the things you don't want rather than try to define in a very definitive list of things you do want, because the odds are there's tons of things you would want, but you don't know what they are. So instead, just say, well, we don't want this, we don't want arseholes, we don't want XYZ. Everybody else is fair game, and then you should have a decent culture after that.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that, because then the filtering is a lot less that way.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to filter somebody out because of your own ignorance, right? Whereas you can filter them out because you objectively know you do not want to deal with them.
Yeah, and especially as a recruiter as well, we literally do filter. So I sometimes got instructions to filter by country, because the hiring manager just said, we like the way they work in Romania, example. So wait a minute, there might be other countries that do that. So what am I actually looking for specifically? Could I at Poland. And then we can hopefully have those type of conversations and get access to more people. That's an idea anyway.
Yeah,
Alrighty.
that's in, like, you, as you were saying that, you kind of, it's a conversation with your recruitment studio. Have you thought about XYZ? Because it's similar. This is not something that I've done, but actually maybe I will do it going forward. Maybe even go to your team and say, we've got this vacant position, programmer. So what do we want? We'd like them to program, please. Yes, we'll have that bit. We'll cover that bit. Is there a personality type, or is there a type of person you feel that would really benefit the team you don't currently have? Or is there somebody that you specifically don't want? Maybe the person who's just left had a trait that you really don't want to see again in the person that we bring in. And, actually supplying the team with somebody in the ilk of what they want, providing it's reasonable, and you're the manager, you get to make a decision at the end of the day. That could actually be a very positive thing for building, again, that culture of, we are a team, we're in it for the long haul. We're not just a bunch of people who happen to have to work together on this single project. Yeah,
100%. That's when I did what is called a job qualification call. A lot of it is spelled on personality as well, and like what would be a culture add. Because I could find a good Unity developer, but what if you need someone who is like very much not like the person who's leaving, for example, or maybe someone who's very proactive and outgoing and would bring people together because the team's missing some of that. And then, whenever that's happened, it's really done quite well. I have a bit of a tactical question now. So you've managed teams globally. So what tools would you say are like indispensable?
Interesting. I don't think any specific tool is indispensable. I think there are sets of tools. So good project management software, that can be Jira. That's what we use. A good video call service, and that means not just like Zoom or Teams or whatever, but actually a good setup in the studio. So we've gone to great expense to install Zoom rooms, so you have fantastic quality microphones, fantastic quality cameras, etc. That makes working with people internationally much easier. There's nothing worse than the delay when you're talking, and then that person doesn't contribute to the meeting because they're sick of feeling like, it's huge. And like, there's, I've heard people say, if you can't all be in a room, then you should all be remote. You should all be on video, even if you're in the studio. So at least everybody's on that same level playing field. That, maybe, but I think another way to do it is make sure you have a good video conferencing setup so the people that are remote can get more of the actual benefit of being together, versus you all lose it just because one person can't be there.
I had a podcast with a bunch of producers and they said just that, and I was very much in agreement because I've been in those meetings. However, then I spoke to someone who worked in America and said, we don't have this problem in America because we build these amazing rooms where the latency is like 0, massive screens, and it feels like they're in the room. I was like, so you just need to pay to solve the problem. Okay.
Yeah.
So
put a bit more money out
the
there.
Room. It just works.
Sorry, remind me of your question again. I was too caught up on the Zoom room.
No, we were just talking about tools about managing teams.
Tools,
so
yeah.
There's a lot of different ways people use it. Some people swear by only using Teams to remove the complexity. I believe that's Glenn Brace who said that. We did a podcast last year, but then some people love Slack, and then some people use different things. So I'm just thinking for people at home, is there any tools that you use? Because you had different time zones, like you had a very extreme situation.
Yeah. No, I won't give specific tools because I think the only person who can really outline the tools is the person listening to this running their studio. But I think you made a good point there, or one of your guests did, which is it's important to focus on a set of tools and not allow people to kind of diversify for small personal preference. So, if we've got a Jira project, then I don't want anybody keeping track of their tasks on Trello because they find Trello easier. They may find Trello easier, but if the group finds Jira easier, you need to upskill that person so that they also find Jira, palatable to use. That is actually talking about growing teams. That's something that as we've matured as a business and we've realized that there's just certain things we're just not good at, and we kind of beat ourselves up about it. And we've brought in people who've got much more organizational experience, people from 10,000, people, companies, etc. And one of the things I've learned is that these are very normal growing pains for a company to have. The issues that Kwalee have had and that we're solving. And they often say things like, you might find that you use Jira, but you don't use Confluence, and this team uses Confluence, and there's a subscription to Monday, and why are we paying for that, and etc. And apparently, what I've heard is it's a very, very normal thing. But what you do need to do is get a hold of it before it gets out of control, before you're spending $5,000 a month on something that one person uses because somebody suggested it offhand, and there was no look into it. So if you've got the luxury, you can hire a procurement manager, you can hire a competent head of IT, and you can say, listen, I want to get here are my problems, here are the tools that I think are best for it, but I've not gone and done the research. Ask yourself that honestly. You may say, I love Jira, but have you actually tried the alternatives? And do you really use it to its deepest subset of tools? And if not, what do you use? Are there cheap alternatives out there that is actually, similar for you? So it's important to evaluate it and not to allow that kind of slow seep of people drifting off of stuff, because small things in the moment will lead over the course of a year. I always say if you lose a day in a project, because we have very short projects, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, that adds up to like 1 or 2 prototypes not ever made that year. And that could be your hit game, and it's just not what you want to be in for the sake of easily solvable process or tool situations.
Yeah, 1,000%. I tend to be the person who procrastinates. I used to procrastinate making my Excel a little bit better because I'm like, oh, it's long-term benefit. But I think there is a reason to have that mentality. I recently found out that some companies, gaming studios, pay $4,000 to $5,000 a month for their recruitment license. I'm like, wait a minute, what? And it's like, some of these don't have to be that expensive. Like some people come in and it's like, yeah, we're just paying for this list of features that we do not use. But it's like subscription creep. And I feel like on a personal level, we're having it. But I think on a company level, it's the easiest thing to be like, just see you in 5 years when the accountant moans at us. But like, yeah, please.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. If you're growing a team, you need to be cognizant of the cost. It doesn't matter how much VC you've got or how much personal private backing you've got or whatever. You don't want to create a cultural habit of it doesn't. That's not my job to think about it.
Habit. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And like, you can, without it becoming a burden on them, you can pass that down to the team. When they say, hey, can I have this Unity package, this asset pack, whatever it is, like one of the questions you can ask them, rather than just will it make our games better, say, do you think it's worth the cost benefit? And if they say, well, I don't know how to work that out, you say, well, how many assets do we get in it? How long would it take you to make them personally? Do you think that would disrupt your project? Oh, yeah, it would take me thousands of hours to make that stuff. Okay, is it good quality? Yeah. Is it acceptable to your level? Absolutely. Then it seems like it's worth purchasing, but if it's like, no, I could knock that up, but I don't have the time now. It's okay. Well, let's make time for you and let's not spend that cost. So, you can, if you instill that into every single person in your team, then you don't have to be so paranoid that it's, you have to be on top of it, or your finance team have to be on top of it, because nobody wants to hear from the finance team ever. It's just not an enjoyable experience. Yeah.
No, I heard a story on an Alex Hormozy podcast where in one of his companies, they had the accountant say, oh, we need to get this tool. It would save us like thousands of hours a year. He said, okay. But then the call costed like stupid high numbers. Like, well, for this to get a return on benefit, we would have to do the exact same things we're doing now for 10 years straight. And then it would break even. So like, yes, we're saving all these hours, but like, no, it's just not. So if we can always do that calculation, then hopefully that, saves the subscription creep.
Yeah. There's definitely like economies of scale in software, obviously, but even in people, right? Again, just to go back to growing teams, like there's often that there's a sense of when you're a small team, this person's really good at something and it's hard for them to let go of doing stuff and it's hard for them to defer work, and you have to be comfortable with things being done, 90% as well as you may do them, but ultimately you can't stretch yourself across all things. And if you're a game studio and you're a mobile studio, or even a larger studio, you go from one team to 2 teams, you may say, right, well, do we need another producer or do we need X more producers? And it's like, well, we can probably cope with it, etc. Because you don't want to spend that single salary, because you think, well, right now that salary or not that salary is X more money spent, right? But you should go one layer deeper. You should go multiple layers deeper and say, well, will we deliver on time more often? Will the team feel more supported? And that results in less churn. There's so many ways you can view it, and it's always it's like, as far as I'm concerned, spending money on people, that's the biggest outlay for a business, especially a software business like us. But it's also the best place to spend your money. I don't want to upgrade to the premium package of Jira if I could actually hire another, inventive, creative human being who could bring more to the company than just the ability to run company managed projects or whatever. So it's really important when you're small and growing to think about those costs and where should you spend them, where's the real value.
Absolutely. So before we close out now at the kind of near the end here, I want to talk about the 2 perspectives of the person hiring someone and then the person being hired joining a new team when it comes to values. So I feel like Kwalee did this very well from the 2 developers I placed. Like they literally sent me a message saying, "Oh my God, this was the best onboarding ever." So I was like, okay, let me try and unpack this. So if you're hiring someone, how do you onboard them to your culture, to your values, like practically?
Practically, yeah. All right. Well, so yeah, a lot of the tips that I gave definitely apply. So let them meet the people that are making the decisions. Make sure that you tell them that you're open to their suggestions to actually make the company better. Like I wrote a LinkedIn post about this the other day as well, about you have to have transparency around your real company goals or your studio goals or your team goals. Like you can't just have the fluffy goal of to make everybody in the world 10% happier or whatever. It has to be like, this is what we're actually trying to do, so you can get on board and you can get behind it, and you can now notice things that we do that don't align with that actual goal, and you can talk to us about it. Be cognizant, rather than just because what I found is I'll interview somebody, especially if they're a senior person. By the time they actually start, I barely remember who they are. And that sounds really bad. But because it can be 4 months from like a notice period and then a relocation or whatever. And I have to just rely on the fact that, well, I'm a good hiring manager. And at the time I was confident and I don't remember what they sound like. And you're just like, oh my God. And you start to worry, like, what if they turn off and they're terrible? But like, try not to do that. Yeah, I've just said I do that, but try not to do that. Try to build a kind of personality map of them in your head and then think about what may they struggle with. If you hire somebody from Eastern Europe and an Eastern European company, look at their CV. Have they ever worked in a company like your company? Is this the biggest company they've ever worked at? Is it the smallest company they've ever worked at? And try to tailor the teams that you put them on, the people that you put them with, so that they feel most comfortable at the beginning. Maybe there's people who English is not their native language. They speak good English, but it's not their native language. And there are other people on the team who also speak their native language. Maybe you can pair them with them at the beginning. If you anticipate they may have a certain struggle when they start around whatever it is, pair them with somebody who had that struggle, and they can help them. Never leave it to the day where you're like, oh, that person starts tomorrow. I should be on. I should be able, because I don't know if we all have, but I've certainly started at companies where that's clearly what's happened. You walk in on
like 50-50 in my experience.
Yeah, you walk in and they're like, oh, Tarak, yes. Yes. You're going to sit there. Let me just, don't worry about the monitor. Don't worry about this. And this, okay, cool. Well, this is great. I feel really valued here. So yeah, don't allow that to happen. Like, go out of your way. Like don't defer that to the admin team or whatever. Like, look at their desk, make sure things are set up properly, make sure they've got the equipment they want. Send them a message on LinkedIn a week before they start and just say, hey, I'm really, can't wait to get you here. If you've got any questions about the local area, maybe they're moving, like, let me know. If you have this is the thing, like, you can't fake this. If you have to have a good company culture, you have to care about the people starting. And if you do, and then you're also cognizant of what their experience will be, a lot of this stuff will come naturally to you. I won't be saying anything new to you. If a lot of what I'm saying is new to you, then you need to think about why this hasn't crossed your mind in the past. And potentially you're just busy. I'm not trying to condemn anybody listening, but like, you need to think, okay, I should put more emphasis on this. Put yourself in their shoes, and that should be a good experience for them.
Yeah, I think it's also a thing that everyone knows they should do at the start, but then it's like good habits as time goes on. Like, oh, I don't have time for that now. I'll do that later. And then you just stop doing it forever. I think that sort of thing starts to happen. Like, when a contractor was starting, would always check in like the week before, the day of, the first week, and then the first month, and then recur. And then some clients, I would ask them, what do they need to do to get ready for Monday? It's like, they should actually do these list of things. It's like, if I didn't ask you, you wouldn't have sent that. And then that onboarding day would have been a lot weirder. So little stuff like that, just saying, maybe install Unity and be ready if you're working remote. These little things, and also just saying, hey, really excited to join, like really excited to have you. Or
yeah, exactly.
This very cool thing that happened was on the day, there's an actual one-to-one meeting that said welcome. It's just a one-to-one meeting. It just said, hey, welcome to company. This is very good to have you here. This is why you're joining. Boom. And then this is what your first week's going to look like. Some companies just skip that part. And I'm like, why? So much value.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I like to tell people how many people they beat out. Like, we had 700 applicants for this job. You are literally the one out of 700 people who applied for this. And you beat the final 3 people. Obviously, you're not going to name their names, but they came from this X studio, X Y studio, and we chose you because we feel. And I can't remember where I heard this, but there's definitely a line of thought in psychology where if you tell people what you like about them or how you expect them to act. What I love about you is you always do this. They're much more likely to do it than if you kind of criticize them for the fact they do not do it. So we cannot wait to have you in the studio because we really believe you're going to increase communication and be vocal when you're telling them this. That's me all over. I'll do that for you. Like, 'cause that's the expectation. So set the expectations, be nice and clear. A real boring but absolutely actionable practical thing is have a Excel sheet, Monday board, Jira, whatever it is, of tasks that you have to run through before they start, tasks that they get to run through when they start, that you can just check in because, I am busy sometimes. I don't have time to every single day catch up with them at the end of the day, whatever reason. But I can go on that Monday board and I can see, okay, they have installed this. They have spoke to that person. Oh, they haven't done this. They've left a comment on it that says can't find X person, whatever. And then I can solve that problem for them. And it's just, really small. But again, I don't know how many companies are actually doing it. And if you implement it tomorrow, like how is it really going to have a negative impact? I highly doubt it.
Yeah, I agree. I used to do this with my freelancer. We'd have like an end of week, I guess, retros, like, hey, how'd it go? Then we just swap that to just end of day reports. And it's like, oh, this is a lot better and saves everyone time. So exactly. Having an async way to keep track of what's happening without having to be like, so what's happened for the last 6 days? Like, why is this? Like, we're in a digital world. Let's keep track of this somewhere where we can both look at it. So 1,000%. And then we can be improved because you might think those 7 tasks was a bit egregious to say they can all do it in one day, but you wouldn't be able to track that without putting it down on paper. Amazing. So before we wrap up, because I believe we did answer the question about what a candidate should do when they start, what is one thing we haven't covered today that you feel like people should hear? Like, what is one thing you want to leave people with?
I feel in general so this applies to growing a team. If you're the person growing a team, presumably for the first time, if you're 15 years older than me and you've done this at 10 times bigger studios, you're probably not super interested in what I have to say. Please give me feedback because there's a lot I need to learn. But if this is the first time you're doing this, think about what you would want of an individual to do when they're getting better at something. So ask for feedback, speak to the team. Don't be afraid. Don't always stop yourself because of something that may go wrong or what's the worst case scenario for doing this. Like, the likelihood is you need to do more and not get scared. So if you think that opening up a position for production to support this new team that you're growing, I'm going to have a difficult conversation with whoever, finance, HR, my boss. So I won't do it. We'll cope. We'll do whatever. Like, it's very rarely the right thing to do. Like, always ask the question, explain to them your concerns. I'm worried that it might be viewed this way, but these are the benefits. Roll people into the conversation. If you're a producer, you'll understand exactly what I'm about to say. One of the easiest parts of a producer's job, but also it's a thing that a lot of people give you credit for, is just putting 2 people together who have asked you a question or they have comments about each other and then just say that to each other, and then they'll go off and they'll solve it and they'll come back and be like, you're so good at your job. And it's like, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure. So don't hold questions in that could be asked. And that's whether you're an individual or you're growing a team. Like, ask all the questions, roll things in, Google it, reach out to people who've done other things. Like, something that I've really noticed on LinkedIn is that people are a lot friendlier than you might imagine. So when we were opening the studio, I'm going to forget his name now, which is terrible of me, but it has been. I've not done this before. I'll look for other studios in Bangalore that have been started by external companies. And there's a company called Lila Games in Bangalore, and they're backed by a Californian kind of VC, I believe. I'm really sorry if I'm getting this wrong. But I reached out and I said, we're starting a studio, and I'm sure there's a lot you've learned. Like, it'd be great to catch up, even better to catch up in person. And they responded, and we had a great conversation. It's like, oh, this is great. So don't be afraid to do that. Ask questions, and don't lock up when it matters and think, no, what I should do is hunker down and solve this myself. There's my ramble in life advice.